Yeah, I said it. Episode 18. Can you guys believe that of the Legacy Warrior
Yeah,
podcast?
wow.
Man, I am here with my beautiful wife, my partner in crime, Stephanie McKinley.
Hey, Warriors.
Man, you guys, I cannot wait to dig into this conversation today with somebody who truly embodies what it means to be a legacy warrior. So, Courtney Feider has such an amazing life story, and she's been through quite a few experiences. But what I love about her story from the conversation we had before she jumped on the podcast is she's got a specific life event that I think is relatively unique that we're going to talk about and share about today. These life events that happen sometimes as adults that are very traumatic. And really, we're going to discuss how she went from, this event, this experience, to refining her inner warrior, to now stepping into her life's purpose in a different way than she ever has. So I cannot wait to bring Courtney on the episode today. We've been so pumped to have this conversation. So, Courtney, what's going on, my friend? How are you?
I am doing well, Walt. Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We are so excited you're here today. You have an incredible story to share, and this is unlike any talk we've ever had on the show so far. Personally, I've never talked to someone about this type of experience, so we're definitely ready to dig in and learn lots of like amazing things from you.
Man, I'm telling you, y'all better get your notepads out today. Y'all better make it happen. Take some notes on this one. And as always, we like to read the bio. You guys know that's what I do. You guys know how I like to certify the people that we have coming on here so that you know, one, and most importantly, they've had the lived experiences that can really help you. So if you haven't yet, make sure you hit subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to, because that helps us continue to get reach. But let's make this about Courtney. So Courtney is a certified professional coach and the founder of thesewildhumans.com. She has extensive experience coaching C-suite corporate executives and Fortune 500 organization and teams. I love this part. She's also a writer with articles published in Forbes, Huffington Post, and Thrive Global, to name a few. And then what I really appreciate about you, Courtney, is just like this lifelong quest to become a better version of yourself, but also hone skill sets that most people wouldn't necessarily take the time to do, to really elevate other people. And so, you've done advanced training in neuroscience, advanced training in trauma, somatic healing, human behavior, and then because we're a family oriented show here, we also love that you're a mama too, and you've been married 18 years. And so, thank you so much for just coming and blessing us by being on the show today and being ready to share your experiences with us.
Absolutely. I'm so glad to be here. And I think I mentioned to you both that I've been binging your podcast like Netflix. So you have is such serious subject matter and such intense, amazing stories, but so compelling. So I started and I couldn't stop.
Well, we love
we
that.
love to hear that.
Yeah.
And you know what's cool is I feel like we can have really serious conversations and we can really go deep on topics and subjects. But everything doesn't have to be so serious, even from traumatic experiences and things that have happened ultimately for us, but maybe in the moments we feel like they're happening to us. We can find joy. We can turn that pain into purpose, a trial and a triumph. And I want people to know to lean in those moments and really work through the pain, because on the other side of that is the light and abundance and true joy and happiness that you will rob from yourself if you're not willing to have the courage to step into that. And it really takes me into my first question, because I really want to unpack this with everybody today. You had an extraordinarily traumatic experience as an adult, 6 years ago now, I think, right?
Almost 7. Yeah.
Okay, almost 7 years ago. And you really had to get on this quest from this experience that we'll talk about to working through the emotions for yourself, for your family, ultimately for your community, and then finding empowerment and finding that warrior that had always been inside you that you needed to go discover again. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about this story? Because it's just wow. It's just one of them wow moments. And we can't wait to hear about it.
Yeah. So I had spent a lot of time being independent all my life. I was someone who didn't get married till my late 20s. I lived abroad. I traveled all over the world, and I would walk around in big cities constantly feeling safe. Like I just really didn't.
Mhm.
I had a lot of warnings from people who loved me. You're always on your own, Courtney. Make sure you're, being watchful and all these things. And I always was, but I felt safe. And really at the time that this happened, it was August 2016. I had a pretty Instagram happy life. I had two young kids. They were super sweet. They were in an amazing school. I was in happy marriage. My husband had a good job. I was changing my career from owning one business to starting to get into consulting and coaching. And so I was in transition, but on the surface, I was happy. So now, if you look on social media and you look at kind of those playback memories, it's very interesting to reflect on your mindset shift.
Mm.
So one Friday in August 2016, August 26th, I'd had a great day. It was an interestingly potent day. I was with friends. I had some great meetings. I got to speak to a lot of people I loved, and we had some really good anchoring conversations in a way that was special. And I remember, and I was gearing up to write a book. I had spent all this time writing it on a computer, and then I hated it, and I kind of deleted everything I had on the computer, and I started writing by hand, which is really my way of getting things out of my system. And I wrote in this notebook, and I decided this Friday afternoon, my kids were being picked up by someone else. And I decided, oh, I can make a choice to maybe either go to yoga class or go home and just like maybe take a nap, because I'm going to spend the weekend writing and doing things my family needs. So I decided to opt for rest. And I was very drawn to go home and rest. And so I pull into my driveway. At the time, I had my phone hooked up to a hands-free setup in my car.
Hmm.
And I was speaking to an old colleague and a friend, and I was just getting out of my car, got the mail. At the end of my driveway, I have a long driveway, and it's on this easement kind of set way back. And I pull my car into the parking spot, and I was still on the phone with a friend, and I was starting to open my door, and I see that there's a man there. And he looks kind of wild-eyed, and he's opening my door. So that was weird by itself. And so he opens my door and he holds a gun up and says, I need you to get out of the car right now. And all my instincts kind of start kicking in. Like I
Hmm.
really was not in my body for a period of
Yeah.
time. I could hear myself screaming, but it wasn't, I wasn't present with it because I was, and everything in my instincts said that I needed to fight this guy, that he knew where I lived. He wanted my car. He wanted things in my home. Who knows what he wanted to do to me? He had a gun pointed at me,
Yeah.
and I needed to fight. And so it was also interesting because it was a very spiritual moment. Like there was this connection to something much bigger than me saying,
Mm.
you know what to do, you know how to fight, you know how to be in this moment, notice all the details, and you'll
It's like
you'll
slow
live,
motion in that moment,
basically.
probably,
But
huh?
there was like this clear choice given to me by something bigger than me that said I needed to
Mm.
go through these steps. So I fought him. I kept trying to wrestle the gun. At some point I thought that the gun would go off, and I worried about that. All this probably happened in a few minutes, but it felt
Yeah.
like hours. And I could tell at a certain point that my screaming, and I mean, first of all, I'm contained in a car. Second of all, I'm way down an easement on a long driveway. And the sound, I've since figured out, the neighbors really couldn't hear me. Um,
Oh, wow.
so one neighbor eventually kind of saw it happening, and we started, so anyway, he and I are in this fight, and I'm trying to stay put in my car. I'm trying to keep my keys. I'm trying to keep my phone. I'm trying to push him away. I'm trying to shut the door. And he
Yeah.
eventually rips me out of the car and points the gun at my chest and tells me he's going to kill me. And I just had this feeling that I just had to keep trying to fight him because I was so concerned about my family. I was so concerned about my kids being in this property that he
Hmm.
now is acquainted with. And as he pulled me out of the car, ended up hitting me across the head with the gun and hitting me in the forehead and throwing me to the ground. So ultimately I had 10 staples in my head, and
Yeah.
I still have a dent actually in my forehead where the gun, the butt of the gun hit me. And, even as he's doing all this, he gets in the car and I keep begging him for my phone, begging him to let me contact my family. And I'm looking over his shoulder and I see my kids' car seats.
Ugh.
And I'm just thankful that they aren't there. And I start kind of talking
Right.
about them. He gets really nervous because now I'm talking about kids and he's looking around because he doesn't know if he's got other people in the car.
Yeah. Yeah.
He eventually leaves and goes down this long driveway, which is not that easy to navigate. So he hits the gate and he breaks the door and he's,
Wow.
gone with my car. And in my car at the time, by coincidence, was, because I'm self-employed, was, garage door opener, keys, ID, purse, all that stuff, all the normal stuff, but also my identification and my computer for work, and some products that I sell for. I have a business where I sell some products, and also this notebook that I had started to write my book in was in the car, and all these notes from
Wow.
my work that aren't replicable, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
I pause on that for a second. I go to the front door. I'm trying to figure out, luckily we had a key coded door so I could get in that way, but I couldn't remember the code. And I'm looking over my shoulder, hoping he doesn't shoot me in the back.
Right.
Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm bleeding
Mm-hmm.
profusely from my head. And I finally get into my house, and I'm going around my house going, I don't know how to call for help without a phone because we don't have a landline. And my mind is just, I have a head injury, plus my mind is just blank, like what I do
Well, the
next.
adrenaline probably is all over the
Yeah, is
place too.
insane.
Everything.
And
Yeah.
and our poor older dog is like following me around trying to, like, you know, see if I'm
Support you.
okay, and
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm bleeding, and so, and I'm finding a towel and I'm like putting it to my head and I'm like mopping up blood as I go because I'm worried about my
Oh my
family
goodness.
seeing it when they get home. And eventually, the person I had been on the phone with showed up at the door, but unfortunately he was wearing the same color t-shirt, so it terrified me because I thought the guy
Oh
had
my
come back.
gosh.
Wow.
But I figured out it was him. He started calling to me. I heard his voice and I recognized this as my friend and my colleague. And I find out after the fact that he had been so terrified when he heard the scuffle, but he didn't know what to do. So he actually called my husband, who was 45 minutes away.
Oh my
And my
goodness.
husband had to call 911 and drive that distance, not knowing what was going on.
Just
Oh
not right.
my
Yeah.
God.
So, thank God everybody got to where they were going without accidents. Our house is a little bit hard to find. So thank God, finally, emergency vehicles started arriving. In a blink, there were 10 police cars and two fire trucks and an ambulance. And as I got into this ambulance, and I was like, I can walk, I'm fine. And everybody's like, no, you're getting on the stretcher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're putting me in this ambulance, and I'm thinking, like, what are all the things that need to be done? Okay, got to cancel the cards, got to, like, my mind is laundry
Oh
listing how to take care of everybody
Mm-hmm.
else. And I'm also processing, like, very clearly. I can remember clearly waiting for the ambulance because I obviously wasn't in danger of passing away at that point. They were
Right.
trying to get everything organized and get all the details. But I remember thinking when I'm in the ambulance, for a minute, I was by myself where the paramedics were up front and Adam's speaking to my parents who had also showed up, and all these things are going on.
Yeah.
And I just thought, you can't save anybody, but you can't save anybody. You can't fix anybody. You can't change anything. This thought comes crashing in. And this other thought that you're the one you've been waiting for. Like, you're your
Mm.
own hero. You're the one you need to get through all this. Of course you need other people, but you have to rely on yourself, and
Yeah.
you have to know yourself. You have to anchor in who you are. And so these two huge things come flying in. And then obviously there was a whole sequence of events. Like, the guy was on the run for about a week. They eventually found him. They found my car after about a week, but when they did find my car, the detective in charge actually got the notebook out of my
Oh
car
wow.
when everything else had to still be in evidence, and brought it back to me because he's like, I know you were stressed about this and I know you can't replace it. And so he brought that back, which was incredibly meaningful. And all these people, and at first they were like, okay, we want to put your, license plate on the news and we want to say your name. And I was a small business owner in town. And I was like, no, you can't say my name and you can't use my license plate number because, I haven't had a chance to talk to all these people. And I don't want to terrify everybody who's ever met me because they don't know anything
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
than a businesswoman,
Mm-hmm.
mother of two was attacked. And it was so uncommon in our community, and it was so uncommon for a business owner. And I had grown up here, and I had gone to college nearby. And so like all these people just know who I am.
Yeah.
And so it just was such an impact. And, of course, then you go through the whole sitting in the ER and waiting. Like you don't think about it. I mean, you see it on movies, I guess, but the idea that when a crime like that happens, it's not like they let you clean up. Like you sit there for
Mm-hmm.
hours waiting for police photographers and
Yeah.
detectives, and the head detective took Adam back, and they like rigged our garage door and things with wrenches and things to, and they changed the locks for us, and like that, within
Wow.
hours they're doing all these things. And it's just time stopped, like really
Sure.
stopped. But in the weeks that followed, we had to fight with insurance to total the car. And I had to apply for victims benefits, which I
Yeah. Yeah.
hated the name of, at the
Right.
least of which, but
Well,
I
we
hate it.
both know how we both feel about that word.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not
That's why
fun.
you say warrior and we wear warrior shirts.
Well, and I had, unfortunately not a great advocate for court, and eventually got a incredible person who's still my friend. But, it was 2 years going to trial for this, and the guy just kept denying that it happened. So what had happened is he had been nearby. He had been a bail bondsman had been coming for him. He ran away from that and stole someone's gun in the house he was staying in,
Oh,
and hid on the property nearby ours. So when he saw me pull in, he was like, "Oh, SUV." And we know
Oh.
later that he had a history of stealing SUVs specifically, but his violent behavior had massively escalated. He had, his wife at the time had brought him 2 syringes of heroin, and he had taken that directly before he attacked me.
yep.
So he was
Yep.
high as a kite and
Yeah.
terrifyingly
Gosh.
strong.
Yeah.
And, they also make you identify the person within like the half hour, which is it's pretty insane because
Because it's
you
fresh,
can't get your
right?
bearings. I mean, it is
Yeah.
fresh, but and I did actually recognize him at first, but I actually misidentified him at first because he was so strung out on drugs, he lost a ton of weight. So it's like
Oh,
just so
yeah. Yeah.
strange when but they told me later, like, actually you noticed him right off. So anyway, but 2 years of court and him saying in court, I didn't do this and all these things. Through a sequence of different events in court, we found out after the fact that he absolutely did, and he admitted it to his attorney and all these things, and it
Mm.
was absolutely him. And so there's no question. Um, when it finally all came to a full circle, the other thing that was really, really complex about it, in addition to trying to continue to run my business, I had no, job to take benefits from and stay
Yeah.
home. Like I was literally, I remember on the phone with a client, not very willingly, trying to coach a client, and that my other line came through. So I rapidly got off with the client, and the other line was the police officer saying they had found him and put him on $1
Oh,
million
wow.
bond. So it's just
Ugh.
weird juxtapositions. So I was, up all night, worried about my family, just super vigilant. And then, as we got closer to the court time, I was told that within the system we live in this state, uh, everything seals record wise on their whole
Mm-hmm.
criminal history except for the victim's impact statements. So I read his entire file, page to page, in a room where I couldn't take anything away. I sat and read the
Yeah.
entire thing and wrote my victim's impact statement from that because I was like hell bent on everything that he had been a part of and escalated, going with him to any opportunity for parole or whatever.
And
But
how many
it's
months
just
was this before you get to this point? How much time,
that
rough
was,
time do you
oh, a
think
long time. I
passed?
mean, so it happened August 2016, and the part where I was compiling a statement wasn't till a year and a half later.
So
Wow. That's
let's
a long
stop right
time.
here because there's a whole other piece to this that when you and I had a conversation about, I want to dig into too. I think about you have this moment, you're literally fighting for your life in the rawest sense of the word. I
Yeah.
mean, in every single capacity. And I think that for me, knowing my own chaotic past, sometimes you start to focus your attention on everybody else and everything else as a
Yes.
protector. We talked,
Hmm.
you're a protector by nature, and you don't focus on yourself.
Hmm.
So talk to me a little bit about that. In those moments in the ambulance, in those moments waiting at the hospital, how are you trying to rectify those quiet moments now of, oh my gosh, this just happened at my house, a place I'm supposed to be the safest.
Right.
And then how did you start to like turn your mentality a little bit from maybe even being in a victim state a little bit? Let's be real. I would have. One of my greatest fears is somebody to break into the house. I lock all the doors every single night because if somebody
Yeah.
breaks into my house, like you, somebody's going to get hurt.
Yeah.
And you don't have no choice. And now I got to protect my wife and children. So,
Right.
talk to me about that a little bit, about how you went from like these quiet moments, struggling probably with your own inner, your own inner like safety mechanisms that were
Yeah.
broken,
Yeah.
to starting to shift a little bit mentally and get to where you weren't going to be paralyzed by the fear that you
Yeah.
had,
Yeah.
and you moved yourself to empowerment.
Yeah, one thing that I never would have thought of until I went through it is there is such an incredible amount of red tape and delays in the court process. And so just, the amount of time it took was crazy to me. I just
Mm,
had no concept of that. And so
yeah.
the fact that it took almost a full 2 years, it was like 18, 19 months by the time he was sentenced. And so much, denial and delays and all these other things that he had
Yeah.
every right to in the system. So, um, there was that. And then going to court each time and seeing him, and so, and I didn't have to be there, but I was hell bent on being there.
Right.
I
Right.
was, definitely, they were like, are you going to come? You don't have to. And I was like, no, I absolutely have to. And so I think that all the way through the court process, I was fiercely in protection mode, protect my business,
Mm-hmm.
protect my family. And a lot of it was like, this guy isn't taking anything else from me. It was very,
Mm,
um, I lost enough. I'm not losing
yeah.
anymore. And I was completely focused on coming back in a way.
I
And
love that.
and that was good to a degree, but also it very much delayed my healing because I
Mm.
spent so much space being resilient and showing I was resilient and making sure everyone around me was doing okay and that I was
Mm-hmm.
progressing through the milestones of, dealing with counseling and the other things that did absolutely help, but I, was so focused on that process. And I was probably just as ignorant as everybody else, thinking that once I'd made the statement in court, which was actually, I can talk about that for a second, but it was actually worse than the event for me in some ways. And then
Mm.
sentencing, and then everybody kind of goes away. Like everything's fine now. And we've
Yeah.
helped her
It's
for two
over.
years and
Yeah.
I'm sure she's going to be great and look how well she's been doing, and they have this container for you. But from the very beginning I was very much in protection of my community because I could hear these statements. It would sometimes happen like, oh, did you hear about that woman who, they would tell me these things because they didn't know it was
Yeah.
me.
And it's you.
And then I'm
Yeah.
like, that was me, and then what do you say? Like, it's so awkward in some ways. And also I had created that container of protection a bit. And as it gradually got out and people started recognize, that it was someone they knew. And women in business that I know that live in these safe neighborhoods were terrified, and rightfully so, because this is very out
Mm-hmm.
of the context. And I would have like all kinds of people I knew in business just like literally see me and break into tears.
Yeah.
And
I
so it
wanted
was
to
just, yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to interrupt for just a second and kind of go back to immediately after the incident happened, and like how did you go about talking to your family
Yeah.
about what happened? Like your kids, how did you explain this to them, and how did that affect all your whole family in that the rest like in that time until you could get this guy convicted? Like how did that change your daily life with your family, and what did you tell them? Like
Yeah.
obviously your husband, like you had to tell him too, but like your kids, how did you, because how old were your kids at the time?
6 and 8.
Oh wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I was gonna say, you
Little.
said you had boosters and stuff in there for them, right?
Yeah,
So you knew they were
exactly.
still little.
Blankets.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was a Friday. So by the time, this was in the afternoon, like around 3 o'clock when it happened. So by the time that, we didn't get home from the ER till around midnight, I think. And,
Yeah.
um, my parents ended up taking my kids for the first night. And I think that it was always intended they would take them the first couple of nights, but, I don't think they knew what to tell them. And I don't think that they, um, knew what we would want them to tell them. And I don't think
Right,
I
because
knew
you were
what I was
physically what did
beaten
your
up.
Yeah.
kids
Got
say
hurt.
when they
Yeah.
saw
Yeah.
you, because you were
Yeah. It wasn't something you could really hide from them.
yeah.
Because I did have 10 staples in my scalp, and I had, and so
Yeah.
that was, shaved a bit. And I had, because it had been thrown down. I was hit with the gun in the top of my forehead and then thrown to the ground and hit my head. So I had double black eyes and this huge like swelling. So I didn't look like
Mm-hmm.
myself at all.
Yeah.
So, when they came home on that Sunday, the original story, we wanted to be really careful not to tell them that something like this happened in their home space
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
because they're very little, right? And so we originally started with that somebody that there was an accident involving the car, so the car was gone because the car is also gone, right? And that's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
inherent for them, and
Mhm.
so they have to understand that too, sort of. So we began with that, and then quickly we realized, and also my husband had his own experience of this because he was called and
Oh
then had to
yeah.
drive home on that news, and
Yeah.
Mm.
his own version of trauma that was very
Yeah.
real.
Well,
And
even your
he
parents,
Yes, I
right?
can't even
Like
imagine.
yeah,
Like,
everybody involved has their
exactly. And my
experience of that.
parents live
Yeah.
a couple of miles away, that essentially the same neighborhood, so
Yeah.
you know
oh my gosh.
it was impactful to everybody. And for the kids, we wanted to make sure not to begin with it was at home, but eventually we started to understand that they could tell that we weren't being completely transparent because we weren't whispering a bunch, but there was just an energy about it.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
Mm.
are very honest with them. Like, some things have happened in my past that I had talked to them about from when they were really little. Like, I lost a friend
Mm-hmm.
when I was young. He passed away, and we talk about him. And so we would, we had this open dialogue, and so they could tell something was off. And,
Yeah.
so we didn't tell them actually about it being at home for quite a long time, but we did tell them that someone did, actually physically hurt me and take the car. And we basically said that it happened while I was working, which,
Mm-hmm.
was a container of that we could hold for a while until we could
Yeah.
get to the point. And now we have talked to them quite extensively about it, and very consciously about when they were ready for it. And I mean, who's ever ready for it, but try to really but it also, like, even my nephews, I remember a couple weeks later, my husband's brother's kids, and they live here in town. They heard their parents talking about it, and they saw something on the news, and they just heard the chatter. And then they, were super upside down and terrified and worried about
Yeah.
me. So I had all these little kids that were worried about me, and I had all this
Yeah.
community that was worried about me. And, my mom had been a preschool teacher at the school where my kids went to school, and my kids were going to this
Oh.
private school, this, they still go to this charter school that was quite small. So there was this whole, and then the business community, and I was a small business owner. So there were all these people that were just so upset. And for the longest time, I was protecting that. Like, that is in my nature,
Yeah.
instinctually, for sure. I am definitely this very maternal, protection oriented person. And also, it was, I don't want to say easy is not the right word, but it was a good distraction from unpacking, because my feelings were so complicated, and I really couldn't
Mm-hmm.
get to I'm also a very future plans and finish oriented person. So
Yeah.
when this court thing was just stringing and stringing and stringing, it was so stressful for me to not to have an outcome. And
Yeah.
so
Oh, I feel
I,
you on
Yes.
that.
yeah,
I'm the
so
same way.
I couldn't really deal with my feelings until it was done. And so I was alluding to, about a year and a half in, like January, they gave me this chance to sit in this private room at the courthouse and go through his whole file and make whatever notes I wanted. And I
Yeah.
wrote this extensive victim impact statement, and I read it at his sentencing. And there were people in the room that were waiting for the next case that were just
Yeah.
crying, crying,
Yeah.
crying.
Do you
And
feel like that writing that letter, was it helpful for you? Like, do you feel like that let you release some of your emotion about it and feel like you got to kind of say what you needed to say to him? Um,
there
I
was there
guess.
was a there was a part of that. Yes, there was a big catharsis for sure. In writing it, there was catharsis. When
Yeah.
I presented it, it was a bit messy because his attorney kept interrupting and saying she can't say that, she can't say this. When the
Mm-hmm.
rules of our state say you can say your experience, whatever your experience
Yeah.
is. It doesn't have to be factual, because at that point he had pled guilty before a trial. So luckily I didn't have to go through a trial. And
Mm-hmm.
he, but there was still that hypothetical, not
Yeah.
real hypothetical, but the judge was actually quite amazing and was like, gave him a sentence that's he based the sentence on when my kids would be old enough to be adults. So he ended up sentenced for 15 years to life with no parole for 15 years of serving. And but after I made that statement, and I mean, my knees were shaking, I couldn't eat, and I had
Sure.
actually
Yeah.
done some media with the news that morning before.
Mm-hmm.
And so all these things happened that day, and then we were supposed to just kind of shut the door, and all these other people had closure. And all of a sudden, I didn't have closure. All of a sudden, I was processing finally after
Yeah.
2
Yeah.
years. And so really the months after in I get late spring and summer 2018, that much later, I mean, I had been a public speaker. I had written a book. I had, I had been like a performance singer. I mean, I liked to be in front of people. And after
Yeah.
that, I mean, there was pretty crippling anxiety and panic attacks and things I really had to work through. And yet I had these, things on the docket. Like,
Yeah.
I think it was it was that summer that I spoke at University of Toronto and presented my book. And it was terrifying to be in front of people, and I had to really take a long time to unpack that. But it was also
Mm-hmm.
something that was so individual, and it was good for me to do the individual healing,
Yeah.
and to recognize that was probably the turning point for me, to recognize that that individual healing was critical.
Yeah.
That seems like it should have
Let's
been
talk
abundantly
about that
obvious.
a little bit. Let's talk about that because you mentioned it here, and I want to edify it because you and I talked about it extensively when we had our conversation before this. You were carrying a lot of weight, whether it was your business or your
Mhm.
kids or even your husband, right? Like trying to be
Yeah.
strong for all these people around you. But I think there's another element when things are bigger than just what happens in your own family, where you're carrying this weight for the community also. And
Mhm.
there had to have been an element for you that said, I want this guy held accountable because I don't ever want him to do this to somebody else again. And
Right.
meanwhile, you're so focused on everybody else,
Right.
except for yourself. And
Right.
so, walk me through that pivot point when you realized, and you said at the beginning, you got to be your own hero. When you realize nobody can do the healing except for me. And I really do have a choice to make. Do I continue to focus on how everyone else feels,
Yeah.
or do I look inward, look at myself in the mirror and say, I've got some work to do if I want to really use this as power at some point and be empowered by this at some point, versus it being the anchor that continues to drown me emotionally because I'm just focused on everybody else and pushing it down. I think I talk to a lot of people. I myself have been through this. It's easy to push it away. It's easy
Mhm.
to dismiss it. It's easy subconsciously to add shame to your experience. And it's easy to be fueled by anger, and it's easy to have all these emotions. What's not easy sometimes is turning the mirror around and saying, you know what? You deserve to love yourself. You deserve to heal from this. You deserve to take the time you need to do the work you're going to have to do. Talk to me about that moment when you really just, that transition for you, um, and what it felt like for you, and what you would tell somebody else who's on the precipice of this moment where they're going to
Mm.
pivot in this amazing way, just like you did. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah. So there's a lot of complexity to this. And the interesting thing is, I did say, in that ambulance, I had these two clear thoughts. I can't save anybody, and I'm my own hero, right? But I
I
didn't
wanted to go
have
back to that.
I didn't have any clarity about what that meant. It just kind of came
Mm-hmm.
rushing in, right? And
Yeah.
the unpacking of that took years, and not even just the years of court, but much beyond that as well.
Yeah.
So I think what I recognized at a certain point, pretty much when everybody kind of went back to their regular lives, which is totally understandable. I mean, so
Mm-hmm.
many people showed up for me in court, and all these, and strangers, friends. I mean, it was pretty phenomenal. And also, they were terrified in lots of ways, and they had their own fear, and there were so many different things going on in the community. And so I think there, in one way, when it was quote over, when the sentencing was finished and he had gone to prison, they could kind of get on with what they needed to get on with, and I could kind of let them go, and my need to protect them to go, because that part was
Yeah.
over for me in a good way. But I don't think I had any, I think I was just as naive as anybody by thinking that that would be an endpoint for me as well. And
Mm-hmm.
there was a certain amount of relief, but there was a great deal. I think I said, standing up there and giving my statement in some ways was worse than being attacked, because in the attack I was in the moment, and I was
Yeah.
literally fighting for my life. And I was also like so confused. Like, you don't, there's this weird confusion and haze that comes in.
Yep.
Obviously, I wasn't in pain while things were happening. There was just so much going on. But when I was standing there, it was all on my shoulders. I was reporting it all. It all had to follow him. And I didn't know until after that what the judge would say, right? So there were all these sort of things, dominoes that had to fall. But then as we've moved ahead in the future, I think the big thing that I had to recognize, I mean, started by me having panic attacks and like physical symptoms where there was no denying it. There was no hiding it, because it was like, there were a few times where I almost passed out in front of a group.
Yeah. I mean, that's real for people.
Yeah, very real. And also I was ashamed, so ashamed of the anxiety, not of the attack, but of the panic that followed it. And so I had to figure that out because it was physically affecting me. But it took months for me to even like get okay with figuring it out. But what I finally realized, and it took literally probably 2018 through, I'm not joking when I say about some part of 2021, 2022, for me to gradually pull all the threads that said, you know, you have to take care of yourself and figure these things out before you're any use to anyone else, really. And so if you don't save yourself first, and if you don't figure these things out, and you don't figure out how to show yourself some love and some compassion and all the things you would naturally give to anybody else, and then look at all of your relationships, the ones you love, the ones you aren't as fond of, everybody you're in communication with is a relationship. So you have to look at all of that complexity and reflect what you need in each of those things. I had always been such a harmonizer, such a person that took care of people, and I was proud of it. It was a big point of pride, but I think I really had to figure out how to take care of myself, and I hadn't practiced that. And I was looking at myself when this attack happened. I was 40, and you know, talk about a huge turning point for 40.
Yeah.
You know, I had to figure out in my 40s, and I had also mourn that I had never done that. I had to be like, look at all the reasons. So I told a counselor at one point, I said I had put all of the bodies in coffins, but I hadn't buried anything. I hadn't gotten rid of or processed completely any of the experiences. I had just sort of contained them and put them to the side and moved on with being strong and being resilient and helping people and making something better out of it. And it's a nice story on the surface, but when you let all of that build up, there's not room anymore. I mean, there was a point where I had no additional space. And I knew if I didn't unpack some of these things, and if I didn't figure out how to be at that foundational level with myself and be my own hero, I wasn't going to be able physically, I wasn't going to have any emotional or mental space for taking care of my kids as they got to be teenagers and adults, and taking care of my partnership and my marriage and my family and my community and everyone I loved. And I also got very clear on that I can't help everybody. Like there was a point where I was trying to, I'll do this for you and I'll do that for you and I'll do, and that came to a hard stop. It had to be like, I have this bubble and core of people that critically need me, and everybody else I mean, I will literally, it's interesting, since I made that choice, it almost goes the other way. Like I'll be in an airport or on an airplane or for a business trip, and somebody will just start telling me everything. And like, I haven't provoked it in any way. They'll just pour their heart out, and I can just sit there and be like, yeah, that's big. And just acknowledge them enough. They feel heard. It's done. The end. But, you know, having enough boundaries and limits to respect the fact that I only have so big a container, and that I have to hold my own energy and my own power. And when I finally figured that out, that's where the situation on August 26, 2016 turned from an attack to an initiation. I was like, that was the turning point where I became who I was supposed to be. That was the turning point.
And I hope y'all heard that. An attack to an initiation. Let's go.
I got all the tools. I got all the gifts. I got all the things that I knew I was meant for and destined for, came crashing in because I could reconcile self-care, self-love, foundational clarity with, this was a karmic event. This guy and I had business. I don't know where and from what. I mean, not in this life, but there was something energetic about that. And there were so many people, like strangers, that would come up to me and be like, if he attacked somebody else, they might have died. And it had nothing to do with me being tougher than anybody else, but this was something I was supposed to go through.
I actually did want to ask you about this because in preparation for the show, we read your article where you explained your story, and it really stuck out to me because I'm spiritual too. And I know a lot of you out there are spiritual also, that you had those distinct voices telling you, you know, it was about you, and almost like it was telling you this was meant to happen.
Yeah.
And I was just really wondering, like, did spirituality help you in your healing process? Like, was that a big part of your healing process, was kind of coming to a clarity with your spirituality?
Yes. And also, I think that I grew up in a very Christian household, and I had a big parting with that particular philosophy when my friend passed away when I was 19, because I was just so upset and angry. And the things I had learned didn't make a lot of sense to me under the banner of what was happening to me. And I had formed a different relationship with spirituality, which I would say was 60% healthy, where I had like a good concept of it and I had a good container for it and what worked for me. But I don't think that I had just this instinctual, innate, lived version of it until
Yeah.
that event. But listening to those voices, and I couldn't tell you exactly what they were. To me, they felt like three very distinct spirits or characters or guides or guardians that were standing there with me and walking through it with me.
Mm.
And it felt very ancestral, and I felt like I wasn't by myself. And there
Yeah.
was clarity. There was a lot of people said, like, why didn't you just give them your keys? And
Yeah, and you
and
mentioned it was kind of like an out of body experience. Can
very
you talk
much.
about that a little bit too?
Yeah. So I mean, I it's interesting. I heard somebody explain a near death experience, like a multiple heart attack
Mm.
kind of near death experience. And I was sitting with this guy a couple months after this happened at actually like kind of a community event. And he was telling the story, and he just wanted to. And it was really interesting because a lot of the ways he explained what he went through, it felt very similar. So
Mm.
in one hand, I wasn't out of my body, like unconscious. But in another hand, didn't really feel like I was. There were two versions of me. There was for sure a version
Yeah.
of me being beaten and threatened. And there was a version of me watching everything and watching from the level of watching kind of with the spiritual element of it, and watching with these voices, and kind of in cohabitation with what was going on, if that makes sense. And so, and then there was a point where I snapped back. And I don't know if that means that my life was really, at risk. I don't know if that means that I was supposed to just walk up to that moment. Like, I couldn't tell you exactly why that's the case. It was so tangible for me. It's not even something that I wondered later if I would need to unpack it through a certain lens. Like, do I need to look at it through what I learned when I grew up? Do I need to look at it through this or that? And I really
Mhm.
have just gotten to a point where it was just so specifically what it was for me. And it's such a big turning point. It's almost like after that, I just had an instinctual wisdom that I didn't have before. And, it wasn't well practiced at first. Like, I was very traumatized. I had a lot of PTSD. I had a lot of
Yeah.
things I had to work through to get to the point where the instinctual wisdom could be in like really good practice. But I think that's why now people will just sort of tell their story, or why they'll, come into trust, or why they'll so I don't know. I mean, I had to look at it. I didn't have to look at it. I came to a just sort of realization that there was a gift here, and that there was a gate I walked through, and that I had an understanding that I definitely didn't have before. Because if I looked at old things, social media lets you look at old things you would say, right?
Yeah.
Old
Mm-hmm.
ways you would think, and it just wasn't present. And I would see other people kind of walking through their own version of becoming, and and respect it so much, but just I was so different from where I was before that. um
You, I,
yeah.
I love that you're making this connection, because I want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure the people listening really make it. Your purpose will always be derived from your pain. And
Mhm.
I love that you said an initiation. That's the first time that I've heard somebody say that. You realize that attack was actually an initiation for everything else that was born from that moment. And it wasn't easy, and you had to do healing. So if you're out there listening, you have to make the choice to heal. You have to make the choice to seeing it as happening for you versus to you. You have to see the choice of it being purposeful. And you're not going to see that necessarily while you're healing. While you're healing, that's opened up. It's like an onion. Each layer that you peel open exposes something new and beautiful, and these gifts that you receive from these experiences that are painful, that you wonder why they even happened, that you're thinking somebody stole something from you, but really they're gifting something to you. But if you're in the tornado of emotion that comes at the beginning of the healing process, this is why we have people. This is why it's real people, real
Mm-hmm.
stories, real triumph on this podcast, because I want you to get the power And more important, the belief from Courtney's story, like you have from ours and everybody else that we bring on here, that this is what's waiting for you, that you can take a moment where you almost lost your life and you're attacked outside of your home, and not only feel empowered by it, but feel like that was an initiation to who you were meant to become in your life. Like that comment to me is so powerful. And it makes me think, you've really taken this to another level for you. And you were doing coaching and executive coaching, and you had a corporate career before. Like, you were doing all of these things anyway. But I feel like talking to you through our conversation and now, those painful moments really did open up a different kind of purpose for you in a different way than it would have without them. And so, how has these moments in your healing and where you're at today, how has all these things affected the way that you actually work now?
Yeah, it's a really good question. A couple things, um, just to build on what you were saying about, if you're going through this, someone out there listening, you can walk through this, and that empowerment, it's so important. I think a big part of this for me is being willing to talk about it. I mean, and that's iterative,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, I didn't come right out of the attack with the ability to do what we're doing today. That wouldn't have been the case. And that's
Right.
okay.
Right.
It takes
Mm-hmm.
time. It takes the time it takes, right? I read somewhere that the human body regenerates completely in 7 years. So August 26th is my 7-year anniversary, and I'm a whole new person, literally.
Mm-hmm.
So that's going to be exciting. But I think that also, I think there's so many people I talked to through this that were like, well, I don't want my kids to hear about this thing that happened to me, or I don't want to tell my, future partner about that thing that happened to me. And I think it's so important that we empower particularly women to tell their stories and be at peace with it
Yeah.
being integrated into the experience and do the healing, that whatever it takes to do the healing, because there is something beautiful on the other side. There is survival and success and purpose and so much depth on the other side. And I just get so sad when I hear these people, wanting that to be so much more retracted, and because it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
offer that healing out into the community and
Amen.
to the greater, um, to let people feel as if they can come to the surface with these things and that they can have the life they want on the other side of it, or even better, that it doesn't have to be a stopping point or even an ending point. It can be just like a moment you have to walk through to get to the form of feeling you need. So I think I'd had all these sort of dreams and aspirations about all these things I wanted to do with coaching and
Yeah.
writing. And I was moving my business from one type of a business to another. And um, I, the interesting thing is the gifts I was given through this initiation and through this, access to this spiritual experience, as horrible in some ways as it was, and the access to raw opening of healing and the necessity of
Mm-hmm.
healing and the necessity of finding myself and the necessity of relying on myself. Really, there's literally not a day that passes anymore, even through the last few years when things have been really weird with business, where I have any worries or reservations that anybody else is going to get ahead of me in coaching or ahead of me in business. Because it's
Mm-hmm.
not like that. Like, no one's going to
Yes.
do it the way I do it. And because I know
That's
that my
right.
story is so unique, and my situation and my way of dealing and being with people is so unique, I know for a fact there's the right place for that. And so
Yeah.
there's so much stress fell away from that. And I've just been able to work on my process and just make it better and better. But I don't compete with people. I don't worry about getting ahead. I don't worry about, I probably should be more intentional about my growth of my business than I am, truthfully, because I just trust that it's going the way that it's supposed to. And there's definitely learning and growth for me to merge those things, right? Obviously that's the healthiest version, but I think that ability to just know that no matter what you do, no matter how you're qualified, no matter what you think you want to do with your life, your version of it is so completely different from anybody
Mm.
else's. And your story is so completely different from anybody else's. That would be one point of encouragement. The other I would offer is the business I was in before I got into coaching and consulting and the types of things I'm doing now, I was pretty good at, but it wasn't what I was supposed to be doing. And to
Yeah.
be in what I'm supposed to be doing is so much different and so much more powerful and so much more whole and complete and long lasting than it could ever be if I was doing something that I was pretty good at. And so, like, when I'm helping my kids understand things, questions about careers and what they'll do in their future, and that's really a big part of the conversation. Like, what do you love? What are you excellent at? What are you driven to do to make the world a better place? What would give you more energy, not take away from you? Like, let's start there. And, I'm happy with everything I touched in my career, but the things that I always was like, I want to do big things and I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I'll figure it out.
Yep.
Now it's like, it just unfolds. It just
Yeah.
like, cause I'm where I'm supposed to be. I'm doing the things I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm listening to those really, really old, wise signals that come to me like, maybe you don't want to spend so much time with that person. Maybe you need to spend more time over here. And just refining my relationships and who I spend time with and how I spend my time all the time. But, staying okay in that self-awareness and that clarity, and also just getting really uncomfortable with discomfort. Like, that was what
Yes.
part of the hardest part of this is. Sitting in dissonance is hard, and it's also so critically necessary. And
Mm.
so I have to do that to be in purpose. I have to do that to be where I'm supposed to be. And I have to literally every day tell myself that I'm the person I was waiting for. And I don't mean that in a selfish way. Like, for the longest
Right.
time, I would have looked at that as a very self-focused comment, but that's not at all the way I feel it or mean it. I just feel it and mean it like, you have to start with you, Courtney. And if you're not whole, complete, and acting in your purpose and walking in that all the time in the way you're communicating with people, how can you possibly help somebody else grow to that? Because you can't
That's right.
understand that growth path or that expansion unless you've, done it yourself.
I love 2 points you made there. I love that you talked about how you don't feel this need to compete, because this is the same kind of realization that we have had on this entrepreneur journey, is that there is no need to compete. We all have our own story. We're all individual. We all have a purpose. We were born with that purpose, and there's no reason to compete with anyone because we all have something to bring to the table, and we should be working together and cheering each other
Mm.
on, because that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
And I also love that you just talked about the self, how you're realizing that all the power that's within yourself, that, and this is something else that we bring up a lot too, is that it all starts with you. You can't be there for anyone else if you're not whole, if you're not
Mhm.
healed, if you don't feel complete. You don't have the capacity to be there for other people. So I love that you talked about that too. And so with that, we wanted to talk about 4 keys that you can give them out there today on how they can make shifts and transformations in their life.
Yeah. What are 4 things that you would tell somebody? Because you probably have 100 of them because you and I are a lot alike. So I
Yeah.
have 100 of them. But if you can only
Stop
leave
me
the
at 4.
audience
Yeah.
with 4 keys, like if you guys can execute on these right now, starting today, it'll start to shift and transform your life. What would be the 4 things you would tell people to start doing?
I think the number one thing I would say is, whatever it takes, come home to yourself. Get comfortable with yourself, understand yourself, figure out where the gaps are, and get whatever support you need for that. And if you don't know what kind of support you need, start asking for other people to help you reflect on that so that you can get a little clearer and gradually figure out how to arrive in that, I guess, priority around taking care of yourself, because it will cascade everything else, in my opinion. The second I would say is examine all of your relationships, but don't limit it to the good ones. So,
Mm.
the way I see it is, anybody you interact with routinely is a relationship. It could be
Yeah.
the grocery store checker. It could be your best friend. It could be your partner or spouse. It could be one of your kids. But examine how you're showing up in all of those relationships, and examine which are feeding you and giving to you and which are taking from you or drawing energy too much from you, and figure out how you can prioritize and pare back and organize those relationships. And it doesn't have to mean cutting a whole bunch of people out. It can definitely mean just reorganizing your time and reorganizing how you do what you do. But I think it's critical. And I think we often overlook the relationships that we don't sort
Oh
of
yeah.
want in
Yes.
our life, and we forget the energy it takes to just have them be present at all. Um,
Yeah.
and the third I would say is, don't don't forget the massive impact of small things, and be very intentional with the things you do for others. So in that way, I had intentionally deleted my old book and written it in a notebook, and then it suddenly disappeared. And this detective decided to bring it back to my doorstep. And in a very crazy twist of, which I don't think is a coincidence at all, I think it's all part of the whole story. My published book reached my doorstep the 1 year anniversary of my attack. So,
Wow.
and it was because that guy brought that back to me. It's not the perfect book. It's not even my favorite. Like, in no way is it my favorite thing that I've done, but there was a full circle there that gave me
Purposeful.
some more optimism and some more belief in people and their goodness and their good nature. So the things you do have an impact. If you feel inclined to do something for somebody, no matter how small, I'd say do it. And also don't overextend those things to the detriment of yourself, right? But just be intentional with that. And the last I would say is work in your passion. If it's being super passionate about your corporate job, awesome. If it's changing your job to doing something entrepreneurial, really think about it and get the support it takes. But for sure, figure it out and do it, and just give yourself the container of time it takes to go there. But the more that I mean, we spend a lot of time working. So the more that you
Right.
can be passionate about everything that you do, I think the happier your home life and your partnership and your kids and the example you're setting. Like I thought about it at one point. I was like, I want
Yes.
my kids to see me being happy with my job, not see me coming home miserable and wanting it always, always wanting it to be over. And so I think those are 4 keys, self, relationship, intentional giving or intentional activities, and being passionate about what you do.
Look, I hope you guys, if you didn't take those notes,
Yeah,
you better go
amazing.
ahead and rewind the last about 4 minutes and go get those notes from that, because those are 4
Yes.
bombs.
She just said, yeah, it's the same thing. 4 amazing nuggets
You
right
know,
there to
4
take away.
diamonds that can literally transform your life. If you only did those dang 4 things, you'd be living a pretty good life. And I think it's super cool you talked about, and Stephanie, you mentioned it too. We put so much weight on this feeling of selfishness, whether it's like the internal, programming from our childhood where we're told don't be selfish and give, 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 give. But we end up giving to the point where we don't have anything left anymore. And those people, those relationships, Courtney, to your point, that really do provide for you, they feed you. You want to show up as a best you for those things. So sometimes you do need to turn inward. You do need to fill your own cup. You do need to clap for yourself. You do need to do the inner work to fill your cup. So when other people love you, it overflows it, because nobody can fill your cup except for you. And in order
Yeah.
to do that and be your best self and really maximize your potential for you and everybody around you, you have to do the work. And those 4 things are things that you can really do the work about and be intentional and change not only your life, but change the legacy of your family, change those people's lives around you, because you are the light in the darkness for them in a different way, not because you're trying to be the light for them, but because you just are the damn light, because you
Yeah.
did the work. So
Yeah, you're so right. The trying to be the light and being the light are totally different. And I think you said something else that hit me with the idea of, just being really clear with your intentions and your reciprocity on a daily
yeah,
basis with the people. Because like I said, that day I had a really good day. And actually, I think there was a potential for that to be my last day, because the day was that whole. Like all the right things
yeah.
happened. All the things that people would have needed from me or I would have needed from them happened that day. And so it's interesting. And that getting out of trying and just into being, because you're settled and you're anchored and you've figured out how to live in that, is such a big deal.
There's some peace that comes with surrender. I'm in my season of surrender spiritually for the last year and a half, 2 years since I left corporate America. And when I'm feeling internal chaos, I'm not surrendering. I'm trying to control, which then is like putting a vice grip around my chest, making it hard to breathe, trying to like make things happen.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you don't take action, but trying to like force something that isn't meant for me. Instead, surrender to it. And when you surrender to it, you find an inner peace. You know what? And I want to transition to this because it's so important. And you guys know, and I say this every time we bring on somebody and we talk about what they do outside of here and where you can find them. I will never bring somebody on this show just to have them on the show. Stephanie would kick me in my shins if I ever try to do that anyway. And so we only bring people on who are truly authentic and congruent to what they say, who are living the life that they're talking about here. And so I love that you have thesewildhumans.com. And I want to talk about this for a minute because I feel like it's such an amazing program that so many people can benefit from. And you've got a couple different versions, right? You've got the Wild Freedom Program. That's really about the personal one-on-one journey, helping people really unleash their true purpose, create a roadmap like the 4 nuggets, plus many others that can create lasting change and really just have that security and balance and internal freedom that I think we're all searching for all the time. Like having that internal personal freedom within yourself in those moments when nobody else is watching will change everything for you. And so I know you do one-on-one and you've got a self-guided experience about that. So I want to make sure I'm doing it justice. So if there's any other color or context you want to add to that, please add that. And then talk to people about where they can find you. So those folks listening that are like, Courtney is my dang spirit animal. I need to go find her.
Courtney's a warrior.
They can find you, and they can find the Becoming a Wild Human experience. So talk about that a little bit. Where's the best outlet for people to come get you?
Yeah, I mean, part of this journey professionally was, walking through how to take what I was doing for companies or corporations or teams and turn it into something more accessible for the average person, right? Somebody just sort of walking through life. And so I created these Wild Humans for that purpose. And there are a few different levels of participation, but I'm always putting out free content on social media, and so you can always find me there for sort of the free stuff. I'm also always scholarshiping our Becoming a Wild Human course, because it's self-guided, and it could be a 2-day experience or a 6-week or a 6-month, depending on how fast you go. There's a lot of content there. Just depends on how much you want to binge and how much you need, and you can jump around within it. But all of that content belongs to the person when they're done. So I want that to be their gift when they're finished. And like I said, if it's not affordable for people, we'll always have a scholarship version of that. And then the Wild Freedom Program is more of the one-to-one road mapping. There's a lot of people very high up in the world in their success or what they're doing that are quite lonely and just really need somebody to sort of like walk with them and help them figure out all the details. And so that's what I do with Wild Freedom, is look at the whole life, look at the work, look at the relationships, look at all of the elements of what make up their life and help them form a plan to get to where they want to be. And I've created a process for that out of my own experience. So, but all that's behind thesewildhumans.com. And we'll continue to let people know where we are in social and things like that through. And there's also just even joining that newsletter system gets everybody free content and free nuggets and gold, because we do want to make sure that there's sort of this abundant gift within that program of people always receiving information.
I love it. I love your heart. And remember guys, it's thesewildhumans.com. It'll be in the show notes, really easy to find with a hyperlink even added for you. So make sure you click on that, go sign up for the newsletter and get in Courtney's ecosystem, because she's just an amazing human.
Courtney, we want to thank you so much for coming on today. We feel blessed that you shared your story with us. I mean, just an incredible story. And I think you're an incredible human and a true warrior for what you're doing now after everything that's happened, and that you're continuing to bless people in the way that you do.
Thank you. And thank you for making space for the people that you do, because these stories are critically important. I was, sort of joking about binging your podcast, but not really. Because it's just so important for, I think, we humans to understand what other humans are going through and to feel normalized in these wild experiences, because other people have been through some crazy stuff too. Yes. And it's helpful, right? It's helpful. Yeah. So I really celebrate you guys for telling the stories. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. I mean, the more courageous people we have like you and us, and, helping people realize they're not alone, removing the stigma of talking about these things, helping people realize because of their experiences, even the ones that maybe they've been running from for a little while, if they turn and face them, knock them to the ground, they will unlock gifts that will help them not only transform their lives, but transform others. And so it's just, I love your story. I loved having you on. I love the nuance and the difference compared to other guests that we've had or had on previously. And so, look, guys, this is actually really perfect. This right here, what we talked about, was perfect for next week as we dive into the power of fail. Yes, you heard me. The power of failing forward and how it can strengthen your mindset, and how you will literally get empowerment from your most challenging moments in life, just like Courtney did. Join Stephanie and I for that episode next Tuesday. And look, as always, if you know somebody needs this, and I hope it was you and you caught it, But if you know it's somebody else that needs a story, make sure send it to them in a text, share it with them. Really help us get the word out here and continue to impact legacies. And you create the ripple effect you want to see in this world. And so join us on your preferred platform, any podcasting platform. This is on YouTube. So if you want to see these two ladies' beautiful faces and my it's like Beauties and the Beast on here right now with my big old beard hanging out. So if you guys want to see us visually, go to Legacy Warrior Podcast on YouTube or go to our Instagram page at Legacy Warrior Podcast. We truly do value your feedback. But hey, until the next time, stay in the arena of life. Keep fighting, keep taking steps forward, and
leave this world a little bit better than you found it.
See you guys next Tuesday.